An introduction to credit card security. As an employee, you know that a large share of customers use credit cards to purchase products from your organization. The security of the customer credit card data, as well as other personal information, is of utmost importance to your organization. Any loss of this data can have serious consequences, not only in financial terms, but also in its impact on your organization's reputation. It is extremely important that all employees are aware of the importance of observing best practices when handling credit card data. This training will give you an introduction to the basic concepts behind payment card security, in accordance with the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS. PCI DSS is a set of security requirements that your organization must observe to guarantee the security of personal information and credit card data. What is the PCI DSS standard? PCI DSS is a set of business and security requirements designed to ensure that organizations that process, store, or transmit payment card data maintain a secure environment. This training will refer to both credit cards and payment cards, but it is important to understand that PCI DSS applies not only to credit cards but also to debit cards and similar payment cards issued by any of the 5 participating financial institutions. PCI DSS was created in 2004 by the founding members of the PCI Security Council. The members are Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover Financial Services, and the Japan Credit Bureau, or JCB. These financial institutions are sometimes called the 5 brands. The Security Council oversees the administration and management of PCI DSS regulations. PCI DSS is extremely important for the security of banks, payment service providers, merchants, and customers. Banks are the issuers of payment cards. Payment service providers process payment card transactions. Merchants accept payment cards as payment for goods or services. And customers use payment cards to purchase goods or services. Any organization that accepts payment cards as payment for goods or services is classified as a merchant by PCI DSS. Because of this broad definition, many different types of organizations are merchants. These include large supermarket chains, convenience stores, pharmacies, restaurants, educational establishments, hotels, hospitals, insurance companies. There are millions of organizations that are classified as merchants in the United States, and each of them must demonstrate compliance with PCI DSS. Why is PCI DSS important? Fraud involving payment cards has become a large and growing problem. There has been a steady drumbeat of news stories about large breaches of credit card data, often involving the data of millions of customers. However, many smaller breaches are never reported in the media. These breaches have cost merchants and banks billions of dollars, and many organizations have suffered tremendous damage to their reputation. For customers, a breach can result in fraudulent charges and even identity theft. Identity theft refers to all types of crime in which someone wrongfully uses another person's personal data in some way that involves fraud or deception, typically for financial gain. A recent study estimated that about 1/3 of consumers in the United States have suffered payment card fraud within the last 5 years. PCI DSS was created in response to a number of high-profile breaches of payment card data. Unfortunately, large breaches have continued, largely because many organizations have failed to comply with PCI DSS requirements. TJX is a retail giant that operates discount retail stores such as TJ Maxx and Marshalls. In 2007, TJX acknowledged that hackers stole at least 45 million debit and credit card numbers over an 18-month period in 2003 by penetrating the company's computer network. The breach occurred because the wireless network of a Marshall store was not properly secured, which allowed hackers to access the network. The breach cost TJX $256 million in just the first year after it reported the breach. It was the largest theft of payment card data in history at the time. More recently, Target Corporation announced another large breach of payment card data in December 2013. In this case, hackers stole approximately 40 million cards, apparently when malware was installed on the company's network through a vendor. This breach occurred despite the fact that Target had invested millions of dollars in security software. Unfortunately, security personnel failed to respond adequately to notifications that the network had been compromised, according to the company. In just the 2 months following the announcement, Target spent $61 million responding to the breach, and analysts estimated that the final cost would reach billions of dollars. Home Depot Incorporated announced an even larger breach of about 56 million cards in September 2014. Early reports suggested that Home Depot had not conducted comprehensive scans of its computer networks each quarter, as PCI DSS requires. Again, the final cost of this breach is likely to reach billions of dollars. Remember that for every large breach, there are thousands of smaller breaches that go unreported by the media. Payment card data breaches are a real threat to both businesses and customers. Fortunately, most breaches can be prevented by following PCI DSS requirements. Learning how to protect payment card data is vital for anyone who is involved with handling or processing payment cards. Understanding payment cards. The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS, requires the protection of data found on both the front and the back of payment cards. On the front, important information includes the primary account number, or PAN, which is a 16-digit number unique to the customer's account, and the card expiration date. Some payment cards also store data on a chip embedded on the front of the card. The customer name and bank name also appear on the front of the card. This illustration identifies these elements. On the back of the payment card, important data can be found in the magnetic strip and the card security code, or CSC. The magnetic strip may include the PAN, the customer's personal identification number, or PIN, and/or the CSC. The CSC is the 3-digit security code printed on the back of many payment cards. The CSC is often called a card verification value, or CVV. In fact, the CSC may be identified by different acronyms on different cards. On Visa cards, it is known as the CVV2 number. On MasterCard cards, it is called the CVC number. On Discover cards, it is called the CID number. On JCB cards, it is known as the CAV2 number. All of these CSC codes appear on the back of their respective cards. However, in the case of American Express, or Amex, the CSC is a 4-digit code printed on the front of the card. This code is called the CID number. This illustration identifies the location of the magnetic strip and CSC on a typical payment card. Protecting the information on a customer's credit card is vitally important. Remember that loss of credit card data can do immense damage to your organization's reputation. In addition, banks and credit card companies may impose fines on merchants that fail to protect cardholder information. Merchants can even lose their ability to process payment cards altogether. Given the popularity of payment cards as a means of paying for goods and services, losing the ability to take payment cards would devastate many merchants. Understanding payment card transactions. When a customer uses a payment card at a merchant, it starts a series of communications between different organizations. The process begins when the customer attempts to pay for goods with a payment card. The merchant typically swipes the customer's card into a point of sale or POS device. The POS device transmits information to the merchant's bank, which then sends an authorization request to the bank that issued the card. Finally, the card issuing bank sends an accept or deny notice to the merchant. If the transaction is authorized, the sale can be closed. The process for payment card sales over the internet is similar. However, these sales typically involve a payment gateway service rather than a POS device. The payment gateway service facilitates communication between the customer and the merchant, and also between the merchant and the payment processor. The payment gateway service also ensures that communication of sensitive information, such as the payment card account number, is encrypted. Encryption is a process that conceals data through a complex code that is extremely difficult for unauthorized parties to read. Note that merchants are not paid immediately for transactions that are made with payment cards, whether the transaction was at a physical location or through the internet. The bank that issued the payment card sends the funds for the transaction to the credit card network, which passes the funds to the merchant's bank. The merchant's bank then deposits the funds into the appropriate account. This is called settlement. The transaction funds are usually deposited into the merchant's bank account within 2 to 4 business days. Best practices for payment card security. Remember that any organization that transmits, stores, or processes cardholder data must comply with the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS. It is important for everyone involved in handling or processing payment cards to follow best practices for payment card security. Things you should do when handling payment cards. You must ensure that all paper payment card receipts are stored securely in locked storage that can only be accessed by authorized personnel. You should ensure that all paper payment card receipts are discarded after 18 months. Paper receipts must be shredded or otherwise destroyed. You should verify that both merchant and customer receipts display only truncated versions of the primary account number, or PAN. Only the last 4 digits should be shown. Thus, a properly truncated PAN is displayed as a series of X's and 4 concluding numbers. You should read and ensure that you understand your organization's payment card security policies. You should contact your organization's IT or security staff or an appropriate manager if you have questions. Things you should not do when handling payment cards. Do not leave credit card receipts or other important documents in unsecured areas. You should also strive to keep your work area tidy and organized. You are more likely to misplace payment card data if your workplace is untidy. Do not dispose of credit card receipts or other sensitive data in an ordinary wastebasket. Always shred these documents when they are no longer necessary. Do not write down, email, or store a customer card security code, or CSC, which is also known as a card verification value, or CVV. Remember that the CSC is found on the back of most payment cards. CSC numbers protect merchants and customers against credit card fraud by helping to verify that customers are in possession of their credit cards. Writing down the CSC number defeats this purpose. Computer security and payment card data. Computer security is also an important part of PCI DSS. You should never send a PAN in an unencrypted email, text, or chat. Encryption is a process that conceals data through a complex code that is extremely difficult for unauthorized parties to read. By contrast, unencrypted communications can easily be intercepted, and the data can be read and used to commit fraud. Most email, text, and chat services do not encrypt data. In particular, free email services typically do not encrypt email. Similarly, text messaging services available through phone carriers are not encrypted. In addition, even when users delete emails, text messages, or chats from their accounts, the data is not deleted from the service itself. If the data is unencrypted, it remains vulnerable to hackers, even if the user has deleted the message. PCI DSS requires users to set strong passwords for computers and applications that access payment card data. Users should never leave default passwords in place because these passwords are easy to guess. For example, a default password might be admin or ABCD1234. Passwords based on personal information are also easy to guess. For example, a password should never be based on your birthday, address, or the name of a child or pet. You should never share your password with anyone, including supervisors, colleagues, and IT staff members. Authorized personnel should be able to access your account without you providing your password. PCI DSS sets the following requirements for passwords. They must be at least 7 characters long. They must contain at least one uppercase letter and one lowercase letter. They must contain at least one number and one special character, such as the pound sign, exclamation point, or @ sign. They must not contain the username. They must expire at least once every 90 days. They must be different from previous passwords. Examples of weak passwords are shown here. Note that the first password consists only of numbers. The second password appears to be a birth date. The third password is a word. Examples of strong passwords are shown here. Note that each of these passwords includes a mix of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. Computer networks are often compromised when people are deceived into downloading malicious software. As a result, it is important for users to exercise caution when using email or internet browsers. You should never click on an attachment or link that comes from an unknown source, because the attachment or link may install malicious software. Be alert for signs that an email is deceptive. For example, emails that contain many misspellings and grammatical errors may not be legitimate. Emails that call for urgent action or offer deals that seem too good to be true should also raise concern. In addition, emails that request sensitive information are unlikely to be legitimate because responsible organizations understand that it is not safe to send such information through unencrypted email. Users should also beware of internet browser pop-ups. These pop-ups typically appear in a new tab or window when the user loads a site or clicks on a link. You should simply close pop-ups unless you open them deliberately. Never click on text, images, or links within the pop-up. If you suspect that a computer or application has been corrupted, stop working and contact IT or security staff immediately. Obviously, do not log in to critical systems, such as payment systems. Do not try to fix the computer yourself, because these attempts may make the problem worse. Note that malicious software can piggyback into other systems without any obvious sign. PCI DSS also requires that additional computer security measures be implemented by IT, security, or management personnel. Most users do not need to understand these measures. However, those responsible for implementing these security measures should complete more advanced PCI DSS education to ensure they are complying with the standard. The importance of security awareness. PCI DSS also requires regular training for all employees that handle or process payment card information. By completing this training, you are documenting your compliance with this PCI DSS requirement. Remember that every member of your organization who handles payment card information must also complete PCI DSS security awareness training. Understanding PCI DSS requirements provides a solid foundation for compliance. By following the best practices presented in this training, you can protect yourself, your organization, and your customers from payment card fraud. PCI DSS compliance levels for merchants. PCI classifies merchants into different compliance levels. Generally speaking, the level at which a given merchant falls depends upon the volume of credit card transactions per year or whether the merchant has had a security breach in the past. A merchant's validation and reporting requirements, that is, the things a merchant must do to demonstrate that it is in compliance with PCI DSS, are determined by its compliance level. For example, a merchant categorized as Level 1 is required to conduct a full network scan on a quarterly basis, as well as an annual on-site security audit. But organizations assigned to lower compliance levels face less rigorous requirements. There are 4 compliance levels for merchants. Each payment brand sets its own levels, although Visa's levels are generally considered the de facto level for merchants. Compliance levels for merchants are based on how many payment cards they process each year. Merchants that process a higher number of cards are held to higher security standards. However, merchants that have suffered a security breach may be assigned to the highest level of security to prevent further breaches. Also, among smaller merchants, the levels distinguish between merchants that process e-commerce transactions and those that process traditional payment card transactions. Level 1. Any merchant processing more than 6 million transactions per year, regardless of whether the transactions are e-commerce or traditional. Merchants that have suffered a security breach may also be assigned to this compliance level. Level 2. Any merchant processing between 1 million and 6 million transactions per year, whether the transactions are e-commerce or traditional. Level 3. Any merchant processing 20,000 to 1 million e-commerce transactions per year. A merchant can process hundreds of thousands of traditional payment card transactions and still not be classified to this level if they process fewer than 20,000 e-commerce transactions. Level 4. Any merchant processing up to 1 million traditional payment card transactions, but fewer than 20,000 e-commerce transactions. Validation and reporting requirements for merchants. Now that we have seen how PCI DSS categorizes merchants into 4 different levels, we can look at the validation and reporting requirements for each level. These are the actions a merchant must take to demonstrate compliance with the standard. The table shows the compliance and validation requirements for each merchant level. For Level 1, on-site security audits are required annually. Self-assessment questionnaires are not required, and the network scan is required quarterly. For Level 2, the on-site security audit is recommended annually but not required. The self-assessment questionnaire is required annually, and a network scan is required quarterly. Level 3, the on-site security audit is not required, the self-assessment questionnaire is required annually, and the network scan is required quarterly. For Level 4, the on-site security audit is not required, the self-assessment questionnaire is only recommended annually, and the network scan is required quarterly. These actions must be validated by a Qualified Security Assessor, or QSA. A QSA is a company that has been qualified by the PCI Council to have their employees perform on-site PCI DSS assessments. The QSA will verify all technical information given by the merchant or service provider, use independent judgment to confirm the standard has been met, provide support and guidance during the compliance process, be on-site for the duration of the assessment, as required, adhere to the PCI DSS security assessment procedures, validate the scope of the assessment, evaluate compensating controls, and produce the final report. The final report provides documentation that the merchant has met the requirements of PCI DSS and performed any remediation required by the QSA. PCI DSS compliance levels for service providers. Remember that all organizations that handle credit card data must be PCI DSS compliant. However, PCI DSS's reporting and validation requirements vary depending on the type of organization. In addition to merchants, organizations that are classified as service providers under PCI DSS must also meet their own reporting and validation requirements. What is a PCI DSS service provider? A PCI DSS service provider is defined as any organization that stores, transmits, or processes cardholder data on behalf of merchants, card members, or other service providers. Some examples of service providers follow. Payment service providers. Payment service providers offer merchants online payment services for payment card transactions. There are many organizations that provide these services, but PayPal is one prominent example. E-commerce hosting providers. E-commerce hosting providers offer services to online businesses, such as securing, managing, and tracking credit card transactions, shopping cart services, etc. Managed firewall services. Managed firewall services and other organizations providing services that could impact on merchant security may also be classified as PCI DSS service providers. For example, an organization that provides managed firewall services to protect network security may be classified as a service provider even if the organization does not have direct access to cardholder data. Compliance levels for service providers. Reporting and validation requirements for service providers are stricter than those for merchants, because service providers process credit card transactions for many organizations, instead of only one. Compliance levels and requirements for service providers are determined by the individual payment card brands. Visa and MasterCard's compliance levels and requirements are the most widely known. Both brands define two compliance levels. The service provider compliance levels and reporting and validation requirements issued by MasterCard are shown here. Note that MasterCard refers to service providers as DSEs, or data storage entities. Level 1 includes all transaction processing providers, or TPPs. These are all DSEs that store, transmit, or process more than 1 million total combined MasterCard and Maestro transactions annually. Level 1 organizations must conduct an annual on-site audit performed by a qualified security assessor, or QSA. They must also conduct a quarterly network scan by an approved scanning vendor. Level 2 includes all DSEs that store, transmit, or process fewer than 1 million total combined MasterCard and Maestro transactions annually. These organizations must conduct an annual self-assessment questionnaire, and they must also conduct a quarterly network scan by an approved scanning vendor. As this example demonstrates, the transaction thresholds of compliance levels and the basic compliance requirements for service providers are analogous to those for merchants.